بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم افتح لنا فتوح العارفين وفقنا توفيق الصالحين. اللهم علمنا بالقرآن وذكر الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يقربنا منك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. اللهم أعذنا من شرور أنفسنا من سيئات أعمالنا أصلح لنا شأننا كله لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. نويت التعلم والتعليم ونفع انتفاع تذكر التذكير والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على تمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعا للهدى دعاة الخير ابتغاء وجه الله مرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. Bismillah. Okay, alhamdulillah. So we're starting the second session on the fiqh of marriage. And jazakallah khairan for your patience. So I'm going to, let's see, the last thing we've done, we were talking about the witnesses. And I'm just going to do a little bit of review. Please do leave feedback at the end of the class, or if you're on the WhatsApp group, please provide feedback because it's always helpful. It is obligatory for the two witnesses, but not the guardian, to be upright. An upright, so what's the definition of an upright person? And keep in mind that when Sheikh Sadiq mentioned that he was quoting one of the earlier scholars, and I mentioned here Muhammad Maulud, that the definition of what is considered upright is in accordance with the age and place. So at the time we're living in, right? An upright person is the one who does not commit major sins and is not persistent with minor sins. So he might or she might commit minor sins now and then, but is not persistent with them. In addition, he or she is someone who would not engage in undignified matter, such that he or she is looked upon in disdain. But the witnesses for this need to be male. They need to be male witnesses. So if they're not at this level, then there needs to be a larger group that witness it. Or so that goes then to the fourth bullet point. The larger the gathering, the less the issue of righteousness being a factor. Also, one must spread the news of the nikah. So in the Maliki, this is required of the nikah contract once it is done. This is what the companions of the Prophet ﷺ would do. So the definition of a secret marriage in the Maliki school, and I know there's some differences between the Maliki and some of the other schools, is that the husband and the guardian, or the husband and the wife, agree to keep it secret from certain people. So there are witnesses, but it's kept secret from certain people. The contract is nullified, it's canceled. It's like the marriage didn't happen. Before and after consummation, unless a long time has passed. So before and after consummation, it's nullified. That's how serious it is. Unless a long time has passed, and if that's something that somebody has done, then I would ask. That needs a fatwa, so I would ask a scholar of fiqh. And ask somebody who's reliable, who's spending their time teaching fiqh, right? That's really, really important because it needs an expert in fiqh. So it can't be the imam at the masjid, irrespective of how big the masjid is. There's huge churches. It's not an indication of the person's righteousness. This is something I mentioned in some of my classes more than once, that at the Isra al-Miraj, when the Prophet ﷺ was 53 years old, there were only, one of my teachers mentioned, 100 Muslims. SubhanAllah. And that was after 13 years of him doing da'wah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the best of creation. So it's not, numbers are not an indication of acceptance of Allah. A lot of times Allah Ta'ala will test the person and test their sincerity. And the Prophet ﷺ was perfectly sincere. Um, and the Sahaba were exposed to his light, so they're, and they're called, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the best qarn meaning, has two meanings: one, century, and two, generation. So the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, the best generation is my generation, and then the one that came after it, and then the one that came after it. And there's difference of opinion. Did he say it 3 or 4 times? So in that order, meaning the Prophet ﷺ's generation is the best. And from what one of my fiqh teachers mentioned, that each Sahabi is better than anybody that came after him, but in the subsequent generations, the whole, the entire generation is better. Like but individually, you might have some people in later generations that are better than others, but collectively, that whole generation is better. But for the Sahaba, every Sahabi is better than anyone that came after him or her. So subhanAllah, because they were exposed. The important thing is the Prophet ﷺ saw them, even if they didn't see him, because some of the big Sahaba, Ibn Maktoum, he was blind, right? So it's not, because the important thing is that the Prophet ﷺ saw them, and they were in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, and they got exposed to the spiritual light of the Prophet ﷺ. And that's why it's really important to keep the company of teachers, because they will have some of that light, depending on how much they practice from the Sunnah and how much they purify their heart, and that's also from the practice of the Sunnah. They will have some of that light. Somebody can inherit 2 things from the Prophet ﷺ. One, the lineage, so the blood, being from the Prophet ﷺ family, and or a knowledge, beneficial knowledge. So, and that's, the scholars are the keys to the books. So the books are there, one gets openings through the teachers. Okay. And then recommendations regarding the marriage contract ceremony, the nikah, to make it brief, to hold it in a public place, masjid, somewhere where it will become public knowledge. But the thing is that women, if they're not praying, they're not allowed to enter a masjid. And this is in all the 4 schools. So before you go, and this is a major fitna, a huge issue, because since most people don't study fiqh these days, unfortunately, which is different from how the Sahaba were, they don't really know these rules. They don't even know if their masjid is a masjid. Is part of it a community center, or is part of it a masjid? You have to usually go back to the board if they know. You have to ask somebody, okay, was part of the community center, if you're going to community center, designated as a masjid? What was the intention of the board? And one has to ask the right questions, because if one says, can women go to this area when they can't pray? And somebody might just say yes, because, people tend to give fatwa without knowing the rulings. So I would just ask, just say, is this considered Islamically a masjid, or is it a musalla? Right? Was this intended to be the house of Allah at the time of the building of the masjid, of the community center, or not? So you have to just, we have to ask specifically. And to congratulate the two, to make dua for the couple. So in a general, if you're going to have a nikah where you invite, there's a lot of families coming, then I would keep it in a place that's not a masjid, because one can't really, if it's hard to tell people, well, if you're not praying, you can't come to my nikah, it's going to cause problems. Then keep it in a place, the community center part, the non-masjid area, so that, one's not sinful and during the marriage contract. To make dua for the couple. Okay, so, okay. conditions of the dowry, because these conditions are mandatory, and it's generally the same conditions that you have for a sale item. So it's important to learn, the basics of buying and selling, and these are some of the same conditions that you have for a sale item. So if you're going to purchase something, so it needs to be pure Islamically, so it can't be alcohol. For example, a lot of time, I've noticed people will buy cat food and it has impure meat in it. Okay, well, the cat can eat impure meat because if it's going and hunting on its own, that's not our responsibility. But if we're buying it, that's our responsibility. So the dowry needs to be pure, right? Usable, functional. So one can't say, okay, I'm just giving you a car and it doesn't really run. One has to have the ability to deliver the item. Again, these are the same conditions as for a sale item. Right, so sometimes on the net it'll say this is not out of stock or something like that. So don't buy that because they're not able to deliver it. A promise is different, but you can't actually have a sales transaction unless they're able to deliver the item. And it's a known item, so one can't say I'm gonna, I have a horse, a pregnant horse, and I don't know what's inside. I don't, but I'm when it delivers, if it delivers, you can have the baby, right? That's an unknown item. Or I'll give you something, I have this thing in my hand. Whatever it is, that's going to be the dowry, right? So it needs to be described properly so that even if you buy something on the net, you need to buy something. You can't buy anything that hasn't been described properly. So look at the pictures, and if we make the niyyah that this is something that we have to do, inshallah we'll get a reward for doing a fard. So even when you're buying something on the net, just it's good to keep this in mind. And these are the conditions. So conditions means without it whatever you're transacting, it's invalid, right? And again, please ask questions. If you're unsure, ask questions. So it's mentioned from, I don't know if it's the hadith is from Sayyidah Aisha or, and she's narrating from the Prophet ﷺ. But anyway, it's mentioned that the Ansari women were praised because modesty did not prevent them from أن يتفقهن في الدين, to develop a deep understanding. Same root as fiqh, to develop a deep understanding in the deen, because they weren't shy to ask. They would ask the Prophet ﷺ all types of questions. And so they weren't. So there's praiseworthy modesty and there's blameworthy modesty. So in certain situations, like in rare, but one of the situations where it's blameworthy modesty is asking questions in class. So, at the end of class, one should ask questions, not during class, so the teacher can teach, but the end of class, and that's praiseworthy. So a lot of times people won't be shy in situations where they should be modest, but then all of a sudden in class they get shy at the end. They're too shy to ask questions. So Allah give us tawfiq to do the right thing. Okay, what is permissible? So the minimum, like they say, don't learn adab from fiqh books. The minimum is a quarter of a dinar, which is a gold coin. And I had looked this up a few weeks ago, but I don't remember the amount. So if somebody can just look up how much is a quarter of a dinar, that's the minimum. Or 3 dinars, silver coins. So the price of gold is pretty high right now. Because these are created as monies, khilqatan, like they're originally, originally they were created as monies, gold and silver. So this paper money that we have, it's just, we're using it as money, but it's not created. It's paper. It's not created as money, right? But we're transacting with it like it's money. But gold and silver are originally, they were created to be money, means of exchange. If he did, okay, so if the husband-to-be did not specify an amount at the time of the contract, nikah, it is not permissible for him to be alone with her until he specifies an amount, 5,000, 10,000. And if it is the amount that is typically given to women of her status, and in this case, you would look at her paternal cousins, the females, right? So women of her status, you look at the paternal side, how much dowry would they get? I mean, unless they're living in a different land, then that's a different situation. Then she cannot refuse. So that's why it's really important you should ask someone, okay, what's the dowry so my husband didn't specify an amount at the time of the contract. He didn't say, I won't give you a dowry, but he said, I'm not going to specify an amount. She can't refuse once it's specified, and if it's an amount that's typically given to women of her status, she can't refuse him. If it is less than what's given to women of her status, she has a choice. If she's pleased with it, and she was previously married, and a Rashida. Remember we said a Rashida is somebody who the father has given her charge of her affairs. So she decides. Then the marriage, if she's pleased with it, she was previously married, she's a Rashida, or she's a Rashida, then the marriage contract is binding. So she's his wife. She can't just say that I'm, binding means, she can't get out of it other than if you were to divorce her. But if she's not pleased with it, so if she's a Rashida, then she, even if she hasn't been married, remember we said that the Rashida is the one whose permission is sought by the father. So then she would decide, am I pleased with this? Because it's less than the amount that's typically given to women of my status. She decides. Otherwise, they're divorced. So it counts as one divorce. If they remarry, that divorce is one strike against them. It's an irrevocable divorce, meaning it's a raj'i divorce. So in a raj'i divorce, which is not this one, he can take her back. But this is irrevocable, which means if they want to remarry, they have to renew the contract. So anytime it says irrevocable divorce, it means ba'in. It's ba'in in Arabic, and it means that they need to renew the contract if they want to remarry. He can't take her back even if he wants to without renewing the contract. It is makruh to delay the giving of the dowry to a later date, and it must be specified. So some of it at least should be given at the contract, some. So it's makruh to delay the giving. So you say, and this causes a lot of fighting, so people need to be careful about this. And a lot of times the woman is shy, it's not right for this is one of the reasons the guardian is there, right? Because he's supposed to protect these type of things, because it's natural for a woman to be shy, especially if she hasn't been married and she may not be a Rashida. It's hard to ask for money. And so sometimes, women end up getting the short end of the stick. So this is why it's important to, teach your daughters, and the men too, to say, just how much, just give it in writing. If you don't want to say it, just say, okay, this is the amount that I want, and I want all of it at the time of the contract. I want some of it, at least $5,000, whatever it is, and then a year later, I want the rest, and give a date. And you're not allowed to pressure somebody. This is a debt that he owes her, right? So if she says, okay, for the rest you can give me 1 year later, and the hadith is matlul ghani zulmun. This is a hadith. Matlul. So if he delays this debt payment and he's ghani, he's able to pay her, it's zulm, right? It's darkness. And on the Day of Judgment, that's zulumat. It's worse on the Day of Judgment. So she may not have any recourse in this world, but there's divine court on the Day of Judgment. So, and you're not allowed to pressure somebody. وَأَكْلُ أَمْوَالِ النَّاسِ بِغَيْرِ طِيبِ نَفْسِ لَا يَحِلُّ. devouring the wealth of people without them, بغير طيب نفس. طيب نفس meaning they don't feel good about it. So they may not say anything, but you kind of pressure them or just let it go, and they don't feel good about it. It's not allowed. So you're not supposed to do that for yourself, and you're not supposed to. The other person's not supposed to pressure you, and you don't feel good about giving it. And so in these situations, just, I would just say to the men, everybody needs to be educated, first of all. So, and they need to know that it's the dhulm. They're starting off marriage, if they are doing this, oppressing already. And there's not, it'll take away the barakah. People have so many fights and there's so many issues. And some of this is because people are, there's oppression. Sometimes it's from both sides. And what's not permitted to be a medium of exchange, again, it's not permitted to be dowry, because again, it's like, in some ways it's treated like a sales contract, as we mentioned. So it's really important, that at least some needs to be given at the time of the nikah, and if not all of it, and then the rest is delayed to a specific time, right? A later date, and that's specified. Okay, if he refuses to give her the specified dowry, so he says, okay, they agreed, it was mentioned at the time of contract, I'll give you 10,000. And he says, no, I'm not going to give you, right? If they've never been alone together, she can refuse to be alone with him until he gives the amount. It's a sign of a person's character. I mean, if you're going to oppress your wife, but if she's already been alone with him, then she's given up that right. Then she can't refuse him the second time. So if they've never been alone together, and she can say, okay, I'm not going to be alone with you until you give me the specified dowry. And they can, but even if they've been alone together, she can't refuse him, but he still owes her that money. So it would go back to the hadith that if he has the money, he's oppressing her. So that, and it's going to take away the barakah. Shaitan's waiting, right? He's just waiting to cause problems between husband and wife. Okay, teaching somebody, again, I'm repeating the slide, teaching Quran and the related hadith about, making it a dowry. Imam Malik did not apply it, so it's not that he didn't take it, but he did not apply it. So in the Maliki school, I know there's khilaf between the madhahib, one could not make that a dowry. As far as khidmah goes, is it permitted or not? Making it a dowry. So somebody says, you may use this car, right? It's a type of service, or I'll pay for your club membership. Right? Is it permitted or not? There's difference of opinion within the school, right? And then if difference of opinion regarding whether it's permitted or not. So ideally, I would stay out of that and just, give a dowry that fulfills the conditions that we mentioned earlier. If in a culture, gifts are typically given by him to her, the husband to the wife, after the contract, they're considered part of the dowry. And this is really important because, la qadar Allah, if there's a divorce or there's dispute, so he says, well, I promised you this amount. But then he gave her gifts. If the value of those gifts are added up and it's, and equals the dowry, then the previous conditions apply, right? So she said, you didn't give me enough. Like she's learned her fiqh, and she's like, okay, well, you didn't give me the amount that's typically given to women of my status, right? She says that. But then he said, aha, so he's learned his fiqh too. He says, but I gave you so much gold after the contract, right? And that's typically, it goes back to the urf, the customary practice. And they typically do exchange gifts, not exchange, because this is a dowry, so this would be related to her. He gives gifts to her. Maybe she gives gifts to him, but there's no issue with dowry. So He's like, hey, I gave you that gold, and traditionally we give gifts to the wife. So the gold amount, you would evaluate that, and if you add it all up, and it's the amount that's given to women of her status, she can't refuse him. The contract is binding. So this is really important to know this. And it's, it's important to really for everyone to study purification of the heart, and the ulama say, and I know this is shocking for people, but they say, and I've heard this from more than one of my teachers, that if one doesn't read, and this is for the general public, one juz of Quran a day, so 20 pages, it doesn't have to be the, what equates to 20 pages. If one doesn't read that daily, it's going to affect your relationship with Allah. So, and then it's going to cause, if our relationship is not strong with Allah, then it causes problems between us and His creation. So a lot of these problems are because, one, we don't know, we haven't learned, and two, because we're not, our relationship is not strong with Allah. So somebody could say, okay, I read Surah Al-Mulk, that's 2.5 pages. I do my 3 quls morning, evening, or after every prayer. So, one should assess that. Right? How much is that? Am I doing my 20 pages every day? If you're doing 10, then say, okay, I'm going to increase it by 2 pages. And I'm going to do that for 40 days without skipping even a day. And that one's established the habit. And then one goes, continues, right? Then add a little bit more. So that one's, and it makes life a lot easier, subhanAllah. Okay, engagement. So it's recommended to have an engagement. Right. However, if one party promises to marry and the other is silent, it is makruh, disliked, so not sinful, but you get a reward for leaving it, for another to propose. If the promise is mutual, so the husband the man promises the wife, or the wife promises the man that, I'll marry you. But he hasn't reciprocated it. So it's makruh for another to propose, unless the one proposing is, we said he's a righteous person, and the one that she's promised herself to, he's not righteous, and that's different, because you want to go for the righteous person, right? So, but if they've mutually promised, it would be haram unless the person, the second suitor, is more righteous. The engagement should be kept private, as per the Prophet ﷺ is recommended, to avoid people sabotaging it. And and it's people don't like to say mashallah, for you to tell them say mashallah, but it's it's recommended to it's arrogant to think, oh, okay, of course I don't feel any jealousy for the person, because somebody could feel it even without realizing it. So it's we should have the humility. Allah give us tawfiq to have the humility to say, okay, I'm going to say mashallah. The couple should bear in mind that they are not married, and Islamic, there's a lot of haram that goes on. They are strangers and must exercise extra caution during this time. So he's not going to flirt with somebody he doesn't know. He may, but he's less likely, or she is. And a lot of impermissible acts occur during this time. They shouldn't have really any contact during this time. And I think in one of the other madhahib, it's required that after the engagement, if I'm not mistaken, that they're not allowed to interact. A lot of permissible acts occur during this time. Just as one would not chat freely with a member of the opposite gender, likewise, one should not do so with one's fiancé, right? So you just wait till the contract, and they shouldn't have long engagements, because there's a lot of haram that goes on, a lot. You want to enter a marriage with the pleasure of Allah, and if people are doing haram stuff, it's gonna affect the marriage. Ideally, one should keep the engagement short to avoid all the wrongdoings. I mean, where I come from, there's just so much stuff that people think they're married, and he's a complete stranger to her. SubhanAllah. So it's, I would just keep the engagement very short to avoid all this stuff, because people majority of people can't control themselves. So walima, wedding ceremony. So the ruling is, again, going back to the 5 rulings, it's recommended to have it. So if somebody didn't have it, I mean, that's up to them. And husband is financially responsible for the cost, so they should discuss all of this ahead of time so he knows that. And one should keep it simple. I mean, the food now is just, there's a hadith, أنا وأتقياء أمتي براء من التكلف. I, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and the atqiya, the righteous people of my ummah, are free from takalluf. So this type of formality. Now this, even inviting people over to dinner, people make it such a, there's like 10 things you have to have, and then nobody wants to invite people because it's just, it takes 2 days of preparation, then people are deprived of the barakah of having guests in the house. So it should be simple. That's the sunnah. Even, if you want to have lamb and things like that, but it's not necessary to have 10, 15 things. Have a couple, 2, 3 really good items. Make it pure, make sure that, the meat is from a place that you trust. Have lamb, make sure the rice is good quality, whatever it is, try to have sunnah foods, dates, pumpkin, things like that. Okay, if invited, it is obligatory to attend. If invited, you have to attend. Okay, what are some of the valid excuses? Well, one, if there's mixing of men and women, that's a valid excuse. If there's religiously undignified people attending, assuming there's no arrogance or ego issue with them, if you are, so that's a valid reason. So people are gonna, especially if you're somebody that people look up to and they're like, hey, she's going to that wedding and she teaches, or she's a student of knowledge, and so it should be okay. Then you have to be even more careful. Because people are going to imitate you. So the rulings are different for people, potentially different for people whom other people will follow. But in general, if there's undignified people, meaning, religiously, they're undignified, it's not an arrogance thing, like, oh, I am above them, but it's like, I'm gonna sit, any table I sit at, there's gonna be backbiting, for example. Then you don't have to go. You wouldn't go. If you're planning on fasting, sorry, this is just one, it should be one bullet point. If you're planning, what was that? If you're planning, okay. So if you're planning on fasting that day, okay, so actually here, so fasting is another excuse. So if you're planning on fasting that day, that's a valid excuse. Assuming you have informed the host when invited that you will be fasting, and the entire walima is during daylight hours. So if it's at night, that's not an excuse. Or there's wrongs occurring. Again, I mentioned that. Mixing of men and women, musical instruments, particularly if stringed, scantily dressed women. So these are excuses for not attending. And then, one thing you can do is you can invite the couple to your place for something, and have a segregated gathering, or have a milad or something like that to, so that you tell them that you care. You show that you care. Light entertainment, a daf only is recommended. No other instruments would be permitted. It is recommended to congratulate the newlyweds and to supplicate for them, right? So, and it gets away from the inshallah, from any hasad or anything. Okay, spiritual preparation, this is really important. So, importance of maintaining one's du'as, sunnah, dhikrs, and being aware that shaitan is ever vigilant about starting fights between spouses. Right? Daily dhikrs from the sunnah, the last 2 ayahs of Surah Al-Baqarah, everybody should be doing these, right? Ayat al-Kursi, 3 quls, the mu'awwidhat, morning and evening, at least. And then one should see, with Latif has litanies, has du'as from the Quran and the sunnah. So doing that, one should be doing these. A lot of times there is physical preparation, like where should we have the wedding, this, that, and the other, and then, but we don't prepare spiritually. The spiritual preparation is more important than anything else, because all the other stuff is just for that day, and then the rest is for, the rest of hopefully a person's life. So this should be done anyway. There's a hadith about it mentions in the Persian of the tongue commentary that Shaitan sends out his minions to cause fasad, corruption in the earth, and then they report back to him, just like people report back to their bosses. A'udhu billah, the shayateen report back to the head shaitan. And he says, they say, oh, I killed someone. I kept whispering to so-and-so until they killed somebody. And, they come with all the facade they've caused just by whispering to people. And then one of them comes and says, A'udhu billah, that he didn't stop whispering until he separated between the husband and wife. And he says, you. So the head shaitan says, you, come sit next to me. A'udhu billah. So that's like the main thing the shayateen want to, above everything else, is that they want to separate between husband and wife. So one needs to be ever vigilant if one's married, that, one is maintaining one's dhikrs. And just say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Just keep saying that. It's important anyway between any two relationships, especially if people are meeting like for classes and for, something that's on the sunnah, because shaitan's going to be ever vigilant because he wants to divide the Muslims and, divide and conquer. Okay. Seeking pleasure. So this was a question that I was asked. Whoops. I did that. So seeking pleasure. Okay, so what's permitted? Spouses may seek pleasure with any part of the body except the rear, the anal opening. The latter is prohibited. It's haram to do that. However, it is permitted to touch it, right? But one does not seek pleasure from it. There's no minimum requirement. This was another question for fulfilling his or her duty. This is, again, goes back to seeking pleasure. She may not refuse him without a valid Islamic excuse, right? And she can't do extra fasts without his permission. I mean, if she knows he's fine with it, then that's different. But if she knows that he might need her sexually, then she can't fast. The husband also must ensure that she is satisfied. Obviously, that's her right as well. Sometimes, so there's no minimum requirement other than whenever he needs her sexually, she needs to go to him. And there's ways to do this. I remember one of my teachers, he mentioned a hadith about, the Prophet, if I remember correctly, saying, just advising the men not to go to their wives like the camel goes to the she-camel and just gets what he needs and then, and then leaves, basically. So that's really important, right? And then there's also, there's the precursors, right? Foreplay and all that, so the other person is ready, right? And vice versa, the wife needs to also say, okay, well, I need to calm down, I need to slow down, this is a huge right, and I'm being oppressive, if I don't fulfill this. So, and important from both sides. It is important that both the husband and wife have taken purification of the heart and have a level of self-awareness. So it says, okay, well, these are my issues. These are the things, because these are the issues I'm struggling with. These are the dhikrs I'm doing. So if a marriage is primarily about seeking one's rights, both or one person will be miserable or possibly just exhausted. So this, and some of this needs to be discussed, ahead of time. And purification of the heart is really important because we're going to go to Allah on our own, right? And graves, right? To our graves alone. So it's important to have that self-awareness. Okay, am I being oppressive? Okay, these are the things that I can't do. These are the things that I can do. It's really important to take an Aqidah class. And one thing I've noticed that, mashallah, some of the women, at least here in the West, they're homeschooling their kids and all that. So they have a lot more access to spirituality, and children are, they're the non-adults, they're sinless, so there'll be spirituality with that. But the men are working, the ones who are working all day, and they're not around the adhan. They're in very spiritually dark places. So sometimes what I'm seeing is happening over the years is because People, even people who are praying in the masajid and all that, they haven't taken classes in aqidah, they're not taking a class regularly, like once a week. People are just, they're losing their deen. Like they're losing their deen, and people just take that for granted. And deen is something that needs to be watered constantly. And it's, like the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the heart rusts, right? Just like metal rusts. So it's really important, and I'm just seeing major things. One, people grow up with, oh, I came from a Muslim country, I kind of know my deen, and they just don't think that learning is from the cradle to the grave. This is for the general person, and then all these, and then 10 years down the road, they've been married for 10 years, and they're having all these issues. And the people that I know who've maintained, whose marriages have been maintained, are the ones who are actually taking, for example, regular classes. They have one teacher whom they trust, and they're taking at least once a week, they're taking a class. Okay, financial, whoops. What happened there? Okay, bismillah. Okay, alhamdulillah, it's back. Bismillah. Okay, we were on slide seeking pleasure. Okay, so next is financial support. So he's not required to support her financially until they have been alone together, or he has invited her to consummate the marriage, with the condition that she is someone the likes of who, has this physical strength to withstand intercourse, right? So it's not just, she has to be, this needs to be discussed, the parents, her guardian, they need to, say, yes, she's ready, she's physically able to. Marriage is not supposed to be trauma, physical, emotional, psychological, right? La darar wa la dirar. It's one of the miracles of the Prophet. Certain of his hadith are called jawami al-kalim. They're comprehensive hadith. It mentioned in Prohibitions of the Tongue that the comprehensive hadith, one has to relate them as is, and this is one of them, because they're principles. La darar wa la dirar. There's no harm, there's no reciprocating harm. So, and it's one of the places that it's mentioned is during marriage contracts. There's no harm, so if he harms her or she harms him, it doesn't make it permissible to harm in response, right? So two wrongs don't make a right. La darar wa la dirar. So he's not required to support her financially until they have been alone together, or he has invited her to consummate the marriage, with the condition that she's someone the likes of who has the physical strength to withstand intercourse. He provides for her based on her social status and his financial ability. And again, he should be honest. This is all I can do, and she should say, okay, she should look at her, and say, okay, this is, I have to be content with this. He's a righteous person. That's the important thing, take classes. Even if you're driving old cars, who cares, right? Just take weekend classes. If you have a good marriage, then everything is fine, right? You won't even care if you have a old car, a new car, but there's plenty of people driving around with new cars and they're miserable because their marriage is miserable. Childbirth, he must provide for her whatever is suitable for her and whatever is the customary practice. He's required to pay for the midwife. If he's from a community where women are provided with servants and do not perform domestic chores, then he must serve her, right? Even if she's not from a social status where domestic help is present. So he has, in the Maliki, she has to serve her if he can't provide servants, if he's from a community where women are provided with servants. So, and people should be, realistic about this. So and she should know her rights, and but she would have to do so she has to do she has to, otherwise she would otherwise, she, domestic chores above is, I hope this makes sense. So if he can't, if he's not from a community where women are provided for with servants, then she has to do domestic chores, right? The husband will ensure that the wife learns that which is obligatory upon her. And a lot of women are going out, like, she needs his permission to go out of the house, unless it's like to visit her parents weekly, things like that. Women are a lot of times going out not dressed properly, and it's the husband's job, because he's responsible for her safety, that he should tell her, you do need to dress properly, things like that, and she shouldn't take that. He should say it nicely, and she shouldn't, take offense to that. So recalcitrance. If she does, this is from either side. If she does not want to spend time with him, or does not want him to seek pleasure from her, he speaks to her about this, right? First, it's talking. Is she tired? Is she being, is she doing too much? If she continues to refuse, he sleeps in a separate bed, right? So this is going back to the ayah in Ali Imran, right? If the latter does not resolve the issue, he may hit her without leaving a mark, provided there is benefit in hitting. And if there's benefit, then he may, if there's no benefit, he may not hit her. And nowadays, it leads to corruption and more issues. So, i.e., there's no benefit, which means he cannot hit her. So people take this ayah out of context. And this is from, these measures are not absolute, so they're conditional, right? If he is oppressive, on the other hand, then a Muslim judge, if one is present, or a group of Muslims, in the absence of a judge, in the Maliki school, a group of Muslims correct him, right? And if he does not listen to their warning, they are allowed to hit him likewise, right? Obviously, if there's going to be benefit. If they cannot verify her claim of oppression, so they don't see it, he would be moved by a Muslim judge or a group of Muslims to live with righteous people, right? And it's important anyway to be in the company of good people. These neighbors would serve as possible witnesses to the oppression, if there is oppression, right? Because they see it. She must seek his permission to leave the home, except seeking obligatory knowledge, visiting parents, etc. And psychological issues resulting from excessive isolation must be given consideration. There are times people are very isolated, right? And if she starts feeling severely depressed, because she's, or people will just go on the internet and just do, all the shopping, so all this needs to be considered now. Okay, so outside of court, so they can't go to court and there is issues. What do? So again, it goes back to two just or righteous male witnesses, just like with the marriage contract. We needed two just or righteous male witnesses. Same thing for arbitration. If the issues continue, right, and there's no court here, who know their fiqh rulings, that's really important. And it's, before one gets married, one should decide this. Okay, if there's issues, who are we going to go to? All this stuff needs to be talked about, right? What classes are we going to take? Have it in writing, right? We're going to take this class. These are the teachers. This is the fiqh we need to take once a week. People should be taking the fiqh of how to raise children. If the issues continue, who know their fiqh rulings and are ideally from the couple's family, although sometimes nowadays it causes more problems because people are not objective, should observe the couple, because most people haven't studied purification of the heart, so there's a lot of emotional stuff that goes on. Neighbors who are family, if they fit the description, meaning they know the fiqh rulings and are ideal. So again, they would be moved, going back to the old slide, ideally they should be moved to an area where they're living with righteous people. And one should be living with them, close to them anyway. And a lot of times people will look at, oh, this house is big, small, but they're so isolated and they have to drive half an hour to, to be anywhere, to go to any teacher. And it really affects the marriage. It is important to speak to someone who knows the fiqh rulings, is not culturally biased, and has wisdom and experience. And Allah give us tawfiq with this. It's important to discuss and agree on this before one marries. And that's why it's really important to take classes before one marries, so that one knows one's rulings. And one says, okay, again, these are the classes we're going to take. This is the teacher who studied traditionally, and we're going to take classes with them. Okay, nursing. She must nurse her child if this is the custom of the women of her social status, right? Then she must. Unless the child will not accept anyone else except the mother, then she must do so, even if it is not their social norm. Otherwise, in the Maliki, it's according to urf, or the culture, women of her social status. There's no minimum for nursing. The maximum is 2 lunar years. But not more than 2 years and 2 months, right? And so it depends. Is he starting to, or she's, do they need, are they still needing the milk and what? Every child is going to be different. One of the things that one of our teachers had mentioned is they did a study, and they mentioned that a child increases in IQ. For every month of nursing, they increase in IQ by 1 point, subhanAllah. And then all the psychological benefits, all the other benefits that we don't even know about. And one of the sisters told me, I think she nursed all her kids. She said the mother's milk adjusts, so it's going to be watery, and sometimes it's more fatty, depending on the suckle of the baby. And one thing I noticed, I can kind of tell that babies that are nursed, because they're never overweight. They're so healthy, mashallah. They're very, subhanallah. And when she told me that, it makes so much sense that the milk adjusts in terms of its fat content. And there's no substitute for it, and I know it's hard. I know for sisters, it's jihad, but I'm like, just these 2 years, and then, then you fulfilled your duty, and, and then all the benefits that come to children, their intelligence, sense of security, all the antibodies, all the dhikr you would do, and one should do a lot of dhikr for ease. Ya Allah, give me tawfiq to fulfill my responsibility, raise this child as a righteous child, and all these things. If we're doing what we're supposed to, then inshallah the people that Allah Ta'ala has placed under us, they'll be obeying. They'll also be righteous. The righteous people, if they're, for example, in the olden days, if their donkey or their animal wasn't obeying them, or somebody was placed under them wasn't obeying them, they would look at what they were doing that was not where they were disobeying Allah, because they would see that as a reflection of what possibly they were doing. SubhanAllah, people were so self-reflective. Okay, if the parents are divorced, it is upon the father to provide for a wet nurse, and she, the mother, may ask for monetary compensation for it. But it is her right to nurse a child if she wishes, right? So again, there shouldn't be fighting about this, but as they say, don't learn from fiqh books. But this is the fiqh of it, is, if it goes down to where, okay, what is my obligation, and what is something that I don't have to do, but I can if I want to. But amazing benefits of nursing, subhanAllah. I think the Prophet ﷺ had 8 wet nurses, and they all became Muslims, subhanAllah. Some nursed more than the Prophet ﷺ, more than others, but subhanAllah, they all became Muslims, subhanAllah. Jazallahu anna. So this is the last slide. Inshallah, we'll meet next Thursday around the same time. So hopefully next Thursday I will be able to finish the fiqh of marriage. Otherwise, inshallah, after I return جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم ما هو أهله. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم ما هو أهله. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ما هو أهله. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على. So if there's any questions, and please, I do need feedback. It really helps a lot. So if you have any feedback, just anything, this can be improved. This helped. This was really good, and we need more of this, or some of the questions didn't get answered, or we have new questions, and please feel free to share this with people might be interested. And Jazakallah khair for attending. And inshallah, see you next Thursday. Inshallah. Jazakallah khair.